let's get started. I wanted to start by congratulating a 14-day challenger who has recently finished their 14-day challenge. So this is Ryu and Isme, I think, and Ryu, yeah. And this is their day one. And you can see in their day one they were already exploring with texture. It looks very, very good. And they had like a good understanding of where the shadows go. So no mistakes such as sharing value words between the nostril and the sides of the nose bridge and the eye socket. So this is really, really good stuff. And that definitely carried over into here. However, there are some slight issues. I do provide a congratulatory critique for 14-day challengers if they hit day 13 or day 14. Okay, so I do give you that. So for those who I skipped, just let me know, repost it, do whatever you have to do in order for me to catch it and give you a critique for it. But I do provide critiques for those who have finished their 14-day challenges. Let me turn off the AC. It's annoying. Alright, so for this piece right here, it feels a little bit cartoony and a little bit long. The nose seems to be a little bit small, so what I'm going to do is increase the size of the nose just a little bit and move it upward. So where I'm moving it, a lot of you are asking, okay, how high do I move it? How do I know how to correct it? It's really the placement of the ears. The nose tends to sit on the ears, on the ear line. It could be a little lower because of the fact that the face moves forward, so the nose can be a little bit lower because this is a curved symmetry line. It's not a straight line. This is a perspective is happening here, and the nose is a little bit smaller than our eye line, or eyesight. So yes, they are on the same line, but this line has to wrap around a cube, so it might seem like it's lower than the horizontal line on which the ears sit, but it is the same line. It could be a little lower, it could be a little higher, depending on the perspective. But I am going to I'm going to just try to push it as far as possible upward, because the face does feel a little bit long, and I'll push it down if I feel like the face needs to be shortened or lengthened just a little bit more. Once I do that, it kind of makes a little bit more sense. It felt like everywhere on her face developed except her nose from birth, which is what it reads as. If the nose is that small but that realistic, it can only be a deformity. And in order to not get that feeling in your work, you have to make sure you measure early on. Like I told you, once you render, it becomes very difficult to hide your mistakes. The more you render a mistake or a disproportionateness in a feature, the more noticeable it is. Because it starts to look, we start to associate and relate to this as a realistic face instead of just a symbol with a really tiny nose. We're not going to complain about a tiny nose and an emoticon. Nobody gives a shit. If this was a character and he's some sort of freaky character, nobody's going to complain. But because this character is fully rendered, we have a relationship now, a communication between the realism of the face you've drawn and our own realism, as if we're looking at a mirror. And when we're looking at a mirror and see a nose that's too small, we're going to notice, why is the nose so small? This is not human. This is not familiar to me. And just see it as, all your viewers are like cavemen. They're all like, they're all like freaked out. And they're like, what's that? Because you've just associated the realism from it. Probably just totally creeped you out because of my gorilla sound. But I'm sorry, I tend to be a little loopy when I'm dead tired. But yeah, you don't want to disassociate your viewers like that. You want to make sure that you're measuring as much as possible. When the nose is that small, definitely I feel further away from the realism of the painting. Now that I corrected that, we need to go back to the first, 15 minutes of the painting. These are some things that you've missed in the first 15 minutes. When you miss those kinds of early brush strokes, it shows as well. This whole box here, this whole thing needs to be lighter, because this is part of the head this is the part of the, let me open up Portrait Studio. This is the part that emerges and protrudes on the sides. Alright? So if we miss this elevation here, if this elevation becomes ignored, let's say, and we don't have an illumination here, what it starts to read as is the nose starts to look, with the way you drew it before, the nose looks like this from the side. Alright, so more disassociation, more like, ooh, 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 ooh. Your viewers will just be poking at the screen. What's that? What have you drawn? So your nose will actually look like this. The nose will actually look like this. And incidentally, a long time ago, I saved a picture of someone who got a nose job. Um, CritiqueHour resources for class. And this is before she got her nose job, and then after. This is the exact replica of what I'm talking about in the real world. So we've got shadows on either side of her nose after her nose job, which got an elevation to it. Really, really amazing example. So you see this is before when her nose was punched in a little bit. Probably really hard for her to breathe. So the function of it was removed. She could probably breathe now because they raised the bridge up. But look at before. Her shadows were moving all the way down. She had a shadow up here, barely any light. The light itself is really tricky. It's not top down. It's kind of like front view a little bit and from the side. But nevertheless, after she added the light in, you see this cylindrical kind of highlight moving up after she had her nose job. Alright, so this is how it would look from the side. You see that? And this is not human. It doesn't feel human. It's you're pushing away your audience by bringing in these kinds of cartoony, even though she's like fucking adorable, this lady. She's like a cartoon character. I don't know what, she's just so cute, right? But we can't get away with this in a painting all the time. It has to be deliberate. So the noses that they made, I think they did a great job with the way they adjusted the noses in How the Grinch Stole Christmas, their live action version. They just did so well because they actually added that snout. Felt like a very believable functioning nose. But when we have this kind of nose in the real world, the one that you drew, it feels very, it feels like it can't function, which is why it's considered a deformity. It's considered a deformity when we don't have an elevation to the bridge. So I'm just using my smudge brush here real quick. And the most important thing about this is making sure that you don't have too much shadow on either side. You don't want to share value words. You've already determined that this is how dark it gets for this kind of valley. It can't be inching in that close to it. Alright, so I'm just going to remove that. And the nose just generally has a higher elevation to it now, if you notice. Alright, so any questions? Thank you, Vince. Hello guys. How are you guys doing today? But you never did critique it. But I mean, it's been a long time, so maybe I would just make another portrait. If I didn't see it, I didn't see it. I usually try to see everyone's and look out for 14-day challenge graduates. But yeah. So, any questions at all? Alright, no questions. So I'm just smoothing this out and adjusting that. The next thing that I would adjust is the fact that you've got way too much shadow on either side. The room is bright, the skin tone is Caucasian, but you've got this intense shadow on either side of the face. This is going to throw off your colors like you don't even know. Alright, so what happens, can anyone tell me when our values are too dark and we throw colors on top, what happens to them? Can anyone tell me what happens? I'm actually just going to wait here for the answer. So I'm just lightening this up. I'm using a lighten layer with a soft brush on 80% opacity. And the neck is a little bit off, but I'm going to go ahead and the reason why this was problematic is because you see this is the shadow on the eye socket area. So that's, if we've already decided this is how dark we can go in this kind of cavity, the sides of the head are not a cavity. They're sides of a cube. They're not holes in a cube. This is holes in a cube. This is sides of a cube. So we have to preserve the deepest shadows we have for only where they count. The colors become muddy. Excellent. Is the highlight no man's land? Malini, don't start talking about tablets. Stay on topic or you get timed out. Please don't discuss anything outside of the lesson. Should the cranium be a little flatter? Not flatter, a little bit more round if anything, but yes, the highlights are on no man's land, definitely. So before, after, do you see that issue? We would not have this deep shadow happening on the face if the room was this bright. If she was photographed in a room that was that bright, the room would bounce light backward because light bounces everywhere. Light is in constant movement. So the light off the floodlights, which bounce off her face, which bounce back this way, the ones that land on the wall bounce back to her face this way, as well as bouncing back everywhere. It's just one massive net of light and light source relationships. All right. So those are some issues. Another set of issues are in the lips. You've drawn that cartoony lip now. You have rendered it accordingly, but it still has that cartoony taste to it, which is those two tails at either sides of the lip. So these little tails here, these originate from, beautiful job rendering though, but these originate from like the cartoony symbol. So these are symbolic lips instead of believable fleshy lips, which don't have these tails at either end. You really don't need that cartoony Betty Boop kind of thing going on in order for us to believe and see the lip. Now, there is this style choice, but you're in no place at this point to break rules for the sake of style. That will happen in the future. But if you're in between, if this is like your best painting that you've ever painted and you've pretty much got one of these under your belt, you're not yet a professional, which professional basically means you haven't been hired yet, in my opinion. So once you get hired, you don't want to bring in your habits in with you. You want to be able to draw for them exactly what they're asking for. You want to be a rendering machine. You want to be able to know exactly what your audience wants. And I'll tell you what your audience wants. Your audience wants believability. They want to be able to associate with this directly. Style gets in the way of that. Style limits your audience. Write that back to me. Style is always dedicated to a specific audience. The more universal you paint, the wider your audience is. So if you're trying to get jobs and you're trying to work and you can only draw a certain kind of nose or a certain kind of mouth, you're limited to that style and the fans that come with it and the employment that comes with it. For lips, please don't try to draw in every single wrinkle of the lips. Try to get rid of them. Make it relief, detail, relief, detail, relief pattern. So make some of them left behind and only where the light touches them. So where is the blending brush? So I'm going to get rid of that detail over here. Style limits your audience. Unless you're ready for that, unless you're ready to formulate an amazing style, put it together, and have a real theory behind your style's design. You're ready on a professional level to break some rules. You really aren't ready to generate your own style yet and work within a style. And this isn't a style. Remember, there is a severe difference between style and habit. Write that back to me. Style and habit are very, very different and are sourced from very different parts of your brain and activities, and they happen in different ways. Whereas style is a deliberate, formulated deviation from the rules of fundamentals in physics. Habits are not intentional. They're a sign of your weakness or dependency on a crutch, or maybe in their negative form. Okay? There are good habits. But in this case, if you're constantly painting this kind of lip, it can be a bad habit. So I'm just bringing in some highlights this way, and I'm going to show you how the lips looked before. Okay. So before, very stylized and habit driven and more so than style. I think when students refute back at me and say, well, this was my style, this was deliberate. No, it wasn't. You're not fooling me or fooling yourself when you say that. A style is something deliberate. It takes thinking behind it. It's not going to happen on your first year of art experimentation. It's not going to happen in your first year. There are some people who are born with, I can't say born with it, but they are developed around this specific taste. So there's tastes. But if you're trying to learn fundamentals and you let your lack of skill at the current time affect the way you're learning and the way you memorize a fundamental, and it inhibits you, if your tastes, quote unquote, or your habits inhibit you from learning the fundamentals in their fullest self, then at that point you're only slowing down your learning process. So you have to know at one point or another you're going to have to stop using the style excuse. You're going to have to stop it completely. A lot of people like to send a lot of really angry emails, not emails, comments and messages on YouTube about how my video might have offended them. And they're like, well, this person obviously wanted the lip to look down, or to look like this, or the nostrils downturn, because they wanted it to look like that. Even when the diagnostic was, in this perspective, the nostrils are simply not visible, they will still go to the extent of saying, no, my specific nostrils were visible in this angle. That it really inhibits. So before we start thinking about that, and getting our keyboards out, unsheathing our keyboards, just remember that. Is it style? Really ask yourself, take a moment of reflection. Is it style or is it habit? Most of the time, if I know anything about growing up, being an artist and learning, and I'm still a student as we speak, it's habit. Believe me, it's habit. Style is a very, very mysterious, arcane thing, and it's not something we're ready to explore just yet if we haven't perfected our edge work and our gradients and our values. So over here, as I was saying, this area needs to be less blended than this area out here where there's fat. So there's a lot of fat over here, which is why the gradients are so wide, and they expand over the face. But over here, the gradients are a little sharper because there's bone structure. So I just need to zoom out. Of course, they're not perfect edges because this is an organic object, but the cube is still there. This is so well blended that my brush strokes are kind of like removing the... So I need to make this look a lot sharper than the cheek, which is a lot more fatty. The eyebrows a little textured too soon. The temples aren't really separated. There needs to be a high point for this part of the brain. And let's just need to close off the forehead just a little bit. And the lights are too high, so I will talk about that in a quick second. So after we do that, I will get a layer on darken. Grab the background light, or whatever's dark, really doesn't matter. And I'm going to throw it on with the new layer. And this is going to darken only the highlights, leaving everything pretty balanced. And I'm going to erase only what I need. So first and foremost, the most important thing to erase away is the nose, followed by the cheeks, on with the on switch of the forehead, down towards the other cheek, the light on the lower part of the eyes, the very tip of the nose, the upper lip, and the height of the chin. And you take out what was there before, you realize you didn't even need to have that much of a spike in order to get this read. At this point you were using no man's land highlights, which are very dangerous. Right here. Sorry, I already darkened it before. But after, everything's a little bit more balanced. Alright? And then when you need it, when you really need it, use highlights where you really need them. So the tip of the nose and all of that. The nostrils could use some edge work. So moving all the way in towards the nostrils like that. This highlight moves all the way inward. Okay. Just like that. I'm sorry I don't have time to thoroughly blend this, so I don't have that much time to look over everyone's work today. Alright, so before, after. The face felt very long before because we shrunk the nose. And after adjusting the face and maybe pushing, maybe if you want to push up the jaw a little bit, the nose will feel a little bit more organic. So these edits don't make it all look like the same old Barbie face, because this, if anything, was a Barbie face. after, if we bring in a natural size, a functioning size to the features, it starts to look a lot less Barbie. Any questions? So when painting cheekbones, is it not okay to sharpen edges around the cheek even if it's like sunken in cheek for a skinny-ish face? No, it's okay, Tanya, to have some edges, but we can't have really, really sharp edges. We can't have geometric edges is all I'm saying, Tanya. Ista attracts a lot of trolls. Thank you, Valentine. Make sure that my mods are blocking only, like, really inappropriate stuff. If anyone does speak out of the topic that we're currently discussing, just give them a timeout. But if anyone's seriously trolling or insulting people, just give them a full ban. Alright, so after, the values are a lot more balanced. At this point, the background color is just too neutral. What I would do is just try to mess around to see what can merge down, whoopsie, what can be done for that. So maybe a little bit of a lighter background would make sense because she has all this highlight on her face. A lighter background really makes sense for her right now. The environment supports this much highlight to sit on her face. It was almost no man's land, no man's land compared to the values used before. So if we compare this, before you had a lot of contrast where it wasn't required. So I hope your 14th day has all these corrections in it. Make sure that the nose is at a size that is functioning. Make sure that the neck is a little bit wider. So I don't have time to fix the neck because I think it's going to take too much time. But let me see if I can do it real quick. Right here, it should pretty much start from where the jaw is. Just along there. And the neck doesn't really do that. Like, that's symbolic right there. So you still have some symbolic tendencies left over, despite all this rendering power that you have. So you can, as you see, you can't escape it. The basics are basics, but they aren't simple. They're not easy to pull off. Alright, so everyone write that back to me. Even if you're at your most advanced stage, you're still in danger of breaking the most basic rules. So always be on your feet. Even if you know how to render and know how to copy from a reference, you still have it in you. It's still possible. You still have the potential to break some serious rules that if someone pointed them out to you, just like, just smack your head, be like, I can't believe I broke such a simple rule. But it happens. It's a constant tug of war. It's a constant fight. You'll never be safe from making these kinds of simple rules. Just depends on how tired you were one day that you skipped a specific fundamental, or, all kinds of reasons play for why we break sudden rules. It's not a sign of, lack of intelligence or lack of experience or lack of skill. It just happens randomly sometimes that we just break really big basics. So I thicken the neck, feels more natural to the size of her head. And then before, very, very symbolic neck, symbolic mouth, nose is very small. You can get away with these kinds of proportions with lines. Maybe they looked good to you on the line sketch stage of the painting, but it didn't match. The light environment was too dark for the amount of contrast you had, so way too much of a dependency on contrast. And after we've kind of evened it out, when we add color to this, it'll be a lot more easy to paint over. Even at your most advanced stage, you are still capable of breaking, yes, exactly, simple rules. Even if you're acidic, you could still become basic. Sure, Ethan. Alright, so, John, you might get timed out if you start dicking around too much. Alright, so before, after, just remember these basic rules. If you stay dependent on too much contrast, it'll be very difficult for you to transfer into color and get all these amazing rules that you learned off the 14 days and really apply them to something like a full illustration or some work. Okay, So this piece right here, the light is coming from the inside. So what does it mean when there is a light under the surface? Does anyone know the term for this? When there is a surface, so this, we're looking at a cross section at this point, and there is the lower surface and there's the upper surface, and this is one belt of the object, and there's light trapped in here. What does that light do? What's it called? Yes, there will always be something to learn. Sorry, I had to get some water. Okay. I'm gonna wait. I was gonna wait to see if anyone knows it. I'm sure you guys know what it is. When there's light trapped under a surface. Subsurface scattering. Excellent. So subsurface scattering, you have to treat it as subsurface. If this is a light source, so if it was an actual lamp. So let's get a lamp, picture of a lamp. And, alright, so Buddha and this lamp right here are pretty much the same kind of object. In order for us to really see how illuminated they are, we need to darken the background, or else it'll just look like light on light. You have to hit no man's land in order to pull this light off, so you have to use pure whites, not just subtle grays. And the object loses its form when it has a pure light on it, so it starts to look more like a sun. It loses its form entirely unless there is a silhouette. So the lamp is like the perfect example of subsurface scattering. It's just that it's not an accurate example of subsurface scattering because the light is the source itself. So the subsurface scattering is the light source itself. Wow, nice lamp. So what you have to decide at this point is this a light source? Is it a light source, or is it the subsurface scattering? Subsurface scattering. Okay, so which one is it? I recommend you go for subsurface scattering. It'll still send out the same message and we won't lose some form. Light floods out form. Too much light floods out form. Please write that back to me. So when too much light is happening, as you can see, we lost sight of his arm. We lost sight of what's happening here. This is the most bright area on the face, but for some on the form, but for some reason this is the most detailed, but for some reason it's not the focal point. It's this. This is the focal point right here because of all the contrast that's happening. So this whole image is completely off balance. The area that is not important has the focal point. The area that is completely flooded out with low contrast. So transfer that low contrast here. Get some subsurface scattering everywhere, and I think you'll be at a better place with this painting. So how would I paint over it? It might be a little bit of a lengthy critique, honestly, but let me see if I can make something happen. So we would see some of the folds still preserved if it was just the light sitting underneath the skin. So if it was a subsurface scattering effect, as in Buddha is glowing, but Buddha hasn't reached level 9000 yet. So he's just glowing very gently, and it imitates the subsurface scattering effect. But he isn't a pure light source. So this illustration was at a lack because you turned him into a pure light source and caused this imbalance. How ironic, because it's all about balance of the self and stuff like that, and this painting is imbalanced. Istebrak. Alright. So, I'm going to sharpen the arm. The hand is on top of the body, so it should be a little sharper. There should be more space here. You can leave some of it behind, but we need some of that light in front on his face happening. I'm just going to get dodge tool to pull this off. Alright, so some of the subsurface scattering is just sitting under his skin. Just some of it running along a straight path. Or, boys and girls, or if you want to make the head important again, but you just have to keep this glow happening, you can make the background lighter than he is, which will bring the contrast back to him. Another form of contrast, but it'll still work. Okay. So it can get a little bit bright at the tops. just a little bit, and he becomes very, very noticeable. It's very easy to know where Buddha is and take a look at his face and enjoy the sight of him and not have to worry too much about whether or not we're seeing his full length, or seeing the focal point rearranged to his face, so they can see the full length of the glow. Alright, so these are just some of my corrections or suggestions for you. Subsurface scattering in jade, so jade, subsurface. I'm saying jade because it's not jade, but it looks like jade. Subsurface scattering in jade is just the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It's just that kind of material that just allows it. I think this is like a Skyrim mod. This is pretty much what I mean. It doesn't have to hit really, really super bright. So just like that, random areas where the light is trapped underneath the surface. Just like we see here. This is all subsurface scattering. The thicker the object, the darker the object is, the more opaque it is, the less subsurface scattering sits on it. So it's only at the very tops, the very surfaces, is the light trapped. So you have to decide where these areas are, these areas that are thinnest. So on the outside, if the light was coming in from behind him, so it was a sunlight, then yes, you do need the highlight behind him. Just like this, you have to have that light, the sunrise behind him, and carry that brightness all the way up. And at that point, it's just going to be a tug of war. You're going to have to be able to darken and lighten any areas that are losing detail. So we would probably need to darken the nose, the sides of the nose, anywhere that's thickest, that has a lot of leveling. So the forehead, the edges of anything have to be illuminated if the light was behind him. So this feels like it's more connected to a light environment than that random glow that was happening that wasn't affecting anything around it that you had in the early stages of the painting. And it was just hitting no man's land where it shouldn't have been. I think you could have preserved that darkness for something else. Or that contrast, for something else. So I'm darkening the whole thing. And I'm only going to erase away where I need it. So along the center, I'm going to be a little bit more careful with that. And along the edges, and just along the heart, right here, where all the light you would typically collect. If you're trying to portray the message of like inner spirituality and all of that stuff. So not as bright as before, just a little bit brighter. And you can erase away as much as you want, but only at the heart, if you want that area to be seen as a light source. Right. So the light's coming behind him. The light behind Buddha is really strong. And then we've got the sunrise distorting the edges that it's shining through. So just like that, just so that we can really prove that this light environment is happening. Just like that. All right. I would go through every edge and make sure that it has that glow that's supposed to be there. Just around here. So this seems like it's more of a real situation of light shining through an object, the light getting caught inside. Yes, the message was that Buddha was supposed to be illuminated, but at that point you can't follow that narrative and make it force you to make errors in the light environment. You have to prove, where did this light source come from? If he was his own light source, then you're drawing a lamp, and at that point it becomes a very limited light environment. You're pointing the light. Rule number 1: don't take pictures of the sun. You never take pictures of the sun. If you have to use some kind of filter so that you can see the sunspots. But at that point, it is no longer photography and art. It's just observation. Don't take pictures of a lamp unless you have to sell it. Unless it's like some really important artistic narrative that's driving you to take a picture of a lamp. But it's not important to make him this bright. At that point, it's just a light bulb. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to lose form. Like, I would do everything in my power to just make sure that I've found the form again. So you can even darken this much just so that you can have that form back and that contrast, but you can keep it as light as it was as well. Maybe it does need to go a little bit darker. I'll just desaturate. Also, a massive part of subsurface scattering, if you remember from my video, it's illuminate and then saturate. And the saturation lines are very, very specific areas. And they all sit around as a border around anything that's illuminated. So before saturation, after saturation, only where it counted, and we desaturated all around him. So to saturated, we desaturated and refocused the saturation only where it was needed. It's these specific little details, it's these tedious details right now that make all the difference. So it all seems like small changes one by one, but at the end of the day, it ends up proving a realistic light environment. That, along with some sharper edge work, referencing properly, making sure you have a nice detail distribution along the face, not having such a fuzzy background, making sure the background is nowhere near close to the values of the foreground. All these things, again, will push the realism even further, and it'll be an easier, nicer picture to look at. All around, it'll be easier on the eyes compared to before. Any questions? Too much light floods out form. Exactly. I don't think he's holding a light orb. I think he's doing the typical Buddha movement, but the light is coming from the inside. Translucent, yes. When get hit by light, they become some kind of see-through. Is that subsurface scattering? Yes, Blind Yeti. It's not see-through, as Marissa says. It's translucent, so it's slightly see-through. It's not transparent. Edges in art, it's a very, very massive topic, but oh look, I have a form study at my disposal to help me explain that. Yay! But edge work in art is simply this. Sometimes some of you guys render with the wrong kind of brush, or you don't know what you're doing, and you get these kinds of edges. Right? It's a very innocent mistake, hardly noticeable, doesn't seem to come with many consequences. But when we do this, we lose detail. Edge work detail doesn't always have to happen by shrinking your brush. Detail can happen by just sharpening an edge, just simply not blending something with something else, depending on if they're layered, so one of them is in front of the other, or if there's edges like angles that don't allow light to share values between the same surface or the same material. But this, just by sharpening this edge with this edge, you get detail. Look at that, beautiful, just for lack of a better word, just sexy edges. All right, so when this happens in a face, around bone structure, foreheads, temples, noses, eyes, angles, lips, any stacking. So if it's 3/4 view and you've got, 3/4 view, you got the nose, and then you've got the distant eye, and then you got the close-up eye. This is one of those edges that is simply so clean, it just does not blend no matter what. This does not blend with this. This is foreground, this is background. If the cheek was there, meaning, so the cheek would be background. That's what I mean. Those are the edge works that you have to remember to have. That's the edge work you have to remember to have in your paintings. Just being able to not blend. It takes a lot of courage to not blend an edge with another edge. But that's what makes detail happen. If we don't do that, if we don't teach ourselves that, we are in danger of detailing symbolically. But this, I just got it just to have fun looking at it. You know how I am with those form magazines, Forms Illustrated. That's so good. That's so good to me. All right. So this is an example of taking a picture of the sun. You're taking a picture of a light source. Have you ever tried taking a picture of a moon with your phone camera? It just doesn't work. It's distorted because the camera doesn't know where to reattach all that light, so the camera just has a big glow on it. Doesn't know how to redistribute those pixels and get an actual form out of it because the camera just is staring at the light source just like we would. This is exactly what would happen to our eyes if we stared at the sun. We wouldn't be able to discern any detail from anything. All the form is flooded. So, that said, you have to accept that at one point or another, you're going to have to flatten this image according to that. So this has to stay this bright, this dark. But does not mean you can't brighten in areas where, just select areas. You can still brighten along some kind of line. And all that's missing here, other than this bird's legs, so this bird can use some legs, just like that. But yeah, all that's missing, other than that little bird's legs, is, I need to get that fixed right there, is the distortion. Right, so just like that. Just some distortion. The moon feels very, very dark for a moon. Of all the settings, you've decided to choose pretty much the hardest one, which is the camera pointing at the light source. But if you really want to have that impact, so if this was some kind of symbol that a witch saw, and it's like an omen, two crows fighting with the moon behind them on the full moon, and the witch is like, yo, fuck, man, the war is coming. And then everybody's like, oh my god. At that point, you have to draw two crows in front of a moon. But just the way you set it up, you could have put the moon up to a corner, but still, just the way you set it up, it just required us to place these crows on top of the moon. And so we have to treat these crows now as a silhouette. And what happens in a silhouette form is flooded, because everything is almost, it disappears. So how do we end up bringing in back detail? Like, how do we bring detail back in? So wing silhouette. I did not spell that right. Silhouette. Alright, so images. That's not what I want. I want an actual picture. Of course, Google. Of course, but of course you would fail me. I didn't ask for wing vector. I asked for a photograph. Really? Alright. Wing, sun. Oh, I knew it! I knew! Sunlight. Bird. Damn you, Photoshop. I mean, this. Alright, beautiful. So let's see, look at how this wing here catches the sunlight. This isn't a perfect silhouette at all. But it's somewhat of a silhouette because the light is shown this way, and so it's kind of behind the wing, so it's kind of like a momentary silhouette. But if we take a look at this, if you can just pull this off on the wings here, so show where the light has, it's like subsurface scattering. Show where the light has seeped in through the wings. That'll give you some detail back. Since there's so much contrast, the actual, so the subsurface scattering runs across like that, where they get thinner. Since the wind is right behind, you get clean edges. So these edges, they gotta be clean, man. They just gotta be fully cleaned out. You can't have that fuzz, because that light is not gonna allow it. So we're just painting away at this. At that point, you'll start getting some detail back. So the subsurface scattering, along with that silhouette rim light, you'll get a lot of what you missed out on just by darkening the image, by darkening the object. Alright? So, color. It's all about the light source at the end of the day. Just keep an eye out for the story, if the story allows you to make these kinds of choices. The light source itself, I don't know why you have an edge around the moon. This is terrible. Get rid of it. You don't need it. In fact, you need a glow around the moon. The glow seems to be purple, so the wash, really good. You chose a wash, which is a very mature choice for an artist. Choosing the wash, which is the general color, the shade of the painting. What is, if you could give the painting one color, what would it be? And that's what you start with. That's the wash. But it's really cool that you chose one, but you don't need any outlines. Right, and then because it's a nighttime scene, it has to be dark. And just remember that Buddha picture. It will not feel like a lamp. if it's open in a lit room, it has to be darkened to a certain point. Let me try that again because that was too much. Okay, and so I would edit out these feathers here. They're really losing lots of detail. I would just completely paint them out. Oh, whoops, I'm still on color. You need that detail back. You need as much detail as you can get on this because we've adjusted the shadow and we've turned it into a silhouette. You can make the eyes like light sources if you can. You can get away with that. So before, after. If you're pointing the camera at a sunlight, you have to have no man's land. You can't have the moon look like cheese. It can't be a matte object. It has to look like a light source, and there has to be effects of the light source on top of the creature. So I don't have time to do this, but man, you need like all kinds of rim lighting happening here. You need light up here. You need light just around here. Over here. What are these, crows or griffins? I'm not sure what they are. Alright, you need some rim light just around the head sizes, so right over here. I mean the head edges, the edges of the head. There's all kinds of rim light necessary right now because the light source is directly behind the object. Over here. This is the focal point. We're sharing it between the objects, the POI, which are the crows, and then the back, the moon, which has decided to make itself the POI of the painting because it's so bright. No man's land will always win. It will always attract our eyes. The brightness, the contrast that comes with brightness will always attract our eyes more than anything else. No, no man's land, what I'm talking about when I say no man's land, is like a nickname I have for these kinds of brights right here, these unbelievably bright brights that you're not supposed to use. These whites over here. Stay away from whites and blacks. They will not help you with sculpting. They are terrible values to paint with. They are impossible to add color on top of. But the only time, the only exception to the rule is if you have a light source in your painting. At that point, you have to make it brighter. Sorry, that question was in reference to the Buddha piece. I think maybe there could be a lag on my end or something. You're still seeing the Buddha? Damn. They are crow fins. Can you use black for the pupil? Yes. The other exception to that rule, I'm sorry, I forgot about the other exception, is if you are actually taking a picture of something that is deeply black. You know, something that is painted black, like a black car needs black. But if we're talking about sculpting the average color range, so if you have a colored object, a colored tree, a colored rock, a colored fire hydrant, you have to stay in the grays. Unless for some reason there's just like this deep pitch black Acura just parked beside the fire hydrant. At that point, it was deliberately painted black. But black is not a color, is it? If you want to be able to paint in color and successfully paint in color, you're going to have to use some grays. You can't use whites. White is not a color and black is not a color. The pupil of the eye absolutely has to be black. If someone's wearing makeup and they're painted a bunch of black paint on their face, absolutely you have to use black. But these are given exceptions because they're black, the actual black we're talking about. We're not talking about a color. You cannot use a black where it's supposed to be yellow later. If the eye is supposed to be yellow, you can't put a black anywhere around that area unless it's the pupil. If the hair is supposed to be blonde, you can't shade with any kinds of blacks unless the hair is like has blonde and dark brown streaks in it. Yeah. So that's the only exception. Those are the only exceptions to the rule. All right. So close that. Photoshop. I believe in you. It's so crazy. I have like, what, 16 gigabytes of RAM and it's still giving me this shit? Anywho, this piece right here, let me flip it. If we compare it to here, this eye is a little bit like orbited away. So all we really have to do, the quickest fix that we can do for this is just, damn, your background color is the exact same value as the cursor. Damn, son. Whoa. Alright, so that's all we have to do. That's it. Flip it back. Before, after. Before, after. It was orbited out, completely left the anatomy. I'm going to just keep going back and forth till I perfect it. Kind of pulled the cheek out with it too. But if you had any reason at all why her face wasn't looking enough of an Audrey Hepburn face, this was why. Everything else was spot on, except just that one little eye. Bloop, bloop. That's how easy it is to spot a deformity in the real world. The slightest little misarranged, like, not deranged, because that's not right, rearranged anatomy and symmetry, the slightest little interruption on the symmetry is so noticeable. Especially if you're painting realistically, when you create that association with your viewer and then you tell them, hey, your reflection has this. Every viewer looks at the painting and it's a reflection of themselves. I know that's very deep and very metaphysical and really, really philosophical, but it's true. So before, after. Now look at this, I say, whoa, this doesn't feel like it looks like me. What's happening here? Let me put that symmetry back. Yeah, that's it. That's all I would change. At that point, she starts to look a lot like the reference. Maybe her eyes need a little bit more of a... Because I flattened the eye. The liquify made the eye like this. So you probably have to fix that. Let me see if I can fix it myself. But yeah, that's all I would fix. And then the other lashes, because she's got lower... Oh, she doesn't have any lower lashes. Oh, she does. They're not there. They're not visible. You need lower lashes. Yeah, that's all you really needed to fix. Remember that I used high density on my brush when I fixed this. And that's what made it such a successful move. Alright, so this piece, it kind of moves us into our I'll probably have to look at this next week. But this piece here, which connects us, yes, as I said, back toward the environments that are coming up in the next couple weeks. You guys have 3 weeks to paint the best environment you've ever painted. Alright, that's more than enough time. It's more time than any studio will give you. Alright, so what it feels like is every aspect of this painting here is on the same distance away from me. This is wrong, because there are different distances. This rock is further away from me than this tree, which is further away from me than this foreground. So the way we distribute contrast according to closeness and distance is darkening and light, like more contrast for objects that are in the foreground and less contrast on objects that are in the background. So I'm doing some quick fixes, throwing in some contrast on the lower areas until we get into the shadows over here. So I'm jumping in between dodge tool on highlights and burn tool on shadows to create this effect. This light is going to seep in here and cause all this brightness to happen. You might even benefit from a cast shadow. Alright, so this feels like it's more in the foreground. Now, I'm going to go ahead and throw the background into some more atmospheric fade. There seems to be a lot of fog in the area. It's a very, it's a deliberately eerie environment. There might be a little bit more light because the light is flooded in this way, so there might be a little bit more light traveling behind from this light source here. So that will sit. I'm going to have to get the background color back. but that light will come back and make this feel like it's more of a silhouette. So that's when I started dodging. I'm gonna have to darken this back. Alright. Make that a little softer. Clean up that edge. Make that a little softer. So we need some of that light to come back. And then that background color, whoa, that atmospheric fade should be gradual, because this part of the this is the same wall, but this part of the wall is closer to me than this part of the wall. So this has to be darker than this part of the wall. Alright. And then at the base here, there seems to be a lot of fog just sitting around. So I'm going to add that atmospheric texture. Very important we have that. By texture, I don't mean gritty bits. By texture, I mean the general taste of the environment. Alright, so a little bit of fog there. I'm gonna throw this part of the tree in some more fog. And as you see, slowly we start to have an environment happen. And we have depth. Depth is emerging. So this top half, for the sake of the composition, this top half has to be darker. Okay. Just darkening this bit here. Don't want to lead the eyes away, but this has to be just a little illuminated, leading the eyes down toward this tree, which is leading our eyes up toward, so this is a cylinder, so I'm just shading it as any form structure, shading it as a cylinder. And that leads us towards this. So this area here, take a look, this area here connected to the light source, ew, what an ugly color, connects in one perfect line of sight back up toward the light, which connects back towards here. So it turns out that this was supposed to be the focal point, not this. This is on the edge of the canvas. This is in the drop dead center of the canvas. Lo and behold, there's not enough rendering happening here. So this has to be rendered more. There has to be more work put into this. I also recommend, please, 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 when you paint a landscape, please make the canvas wider. It doesn't even have to be that much work. It can just be the most rough work ever. You just need to make the canvas wider. It completes the image. So let me just do some random shit here. I don't think I can do this. Maybe I can. Okay, but this canvas needs to be wider. Let's see if we can just connect those. So beautiful piece all around. I just really wish that you created more of a system between what's furthest and what's closest. If this is daytime or if this is the sunlight, we can throw in this very, very strong light source color. It's not complete no man's land, but it'll do. And what it could do, again, if you want to have cast shadows, you can start bringing in those rays. Of course, the ray isn't going through everything. This is still in front. And this is where you'll get that massive detail. And this is where you'll get that just massive bit of light over here, just sitting on the weeds. That big piece of light source. And if you have muck and all kinds of material floating in the air, it'll catch some of that and throw it over. And it'll be visible as it throws the light source over it. The cast shadow, or the ray, the God ray, will be visible. it'll throw that texture over onto the weeds. These are just some of the options, but you always have to make sure you know what your focal point is before you paint. You have to decide in your thumbnail painting exactly what your focal point will be. This part I haven't painted over, so I'll just get rid of it. But altogether, it's a great painting. It just needs a little bit more focus and a little bit more organization between your foreground, background, and middle ground, and which is one massive part of painting an environment. And you need to decide what your focal point is going to be, which is another massive pillar of painting an environment. If you haven't addressed both of them, it will look flat and muddy, which is what this was suffering from. So that's the diagnosis, that's the illness, and the cure is just next time that you put together a piece like this, you have to remember to differentiate between these different depths, these different units. The only tree, also back to the silhouettes, the only tree-shaped object I see is this tree. That's the only tree-shaped object, and it's so unrendered that it's not really carrying the foliage. So I could very well be looking at tendons. I could be looking inside a heart. You know how sometimes looking inside of a body it looks like trees and shit? But if this is not a heart, this is not the inside of a heart, this is an environment. There's a reason why it's not reading. This is not a tree silhouette, this is just a big blob of foliage, so overgrowth. This is also overgrowth. So you've got this piece and this piece. Without this tree, you just have two blobs in front of each other. Do you see that? These do not carry the read, even though they take up this much space. Take a look at how much space they take up on the canvas. So how do we fix that? We fix that by focusing the focal point back in and bringing in some more silhouettes of trees. So maybe putting some interruptions on this bit right here. It will not read from a distance. You will not get away with it if we don't see trees and if we don't read tree anywhere else. It will not look like foliage. And it's very important, like emergency, like call 911. Emergency, if you want to save this painting, start rendering some trees here. Any questions? Could it be against the rules because distance is always lighter and less contrast? But how often do we, that makes sense, but how do we do then for a light foreground? Or is it just forbidden? It's not forbidden. This is one of the lightest places in the painting. But it isn't recommended that you have, alright, one of my paintings here that I got away with. So let me see if I can find it for you. It's not the best painting, it was a quick sketch. I have uploaded it to my portfolio. Right here, this is foreground, but I got away with some really massive contrast over here. But that typical dark to light really reads very instantly. It's a very quick read. Even for a sketch, very unrendered, extremely crappy material, quality material we have here, but still it reads really important. If he has like an armor, some armor with shine on it, I can't use this value. He's just not, he's under a canopy of shadow, and he's looking at the background, which is a little bit more open. This one here, not that good. But yeah, it's you have to follow those rules. At very specific instances can you break that, and it's only if the foreground had a wizard, and the wizard had a staff, and he was all like, "You shall not pass," and the light source was just mad crazy. It was just like super bright light source, and it was illuminating everything. That's the only time you can break that, if something in the foreground is a light source. Alright, any questions? The focal point of this picture is this right here, this tree. Everything points to this tree. Everything points to this little bit. So you know what would be really cool if you did? I would totally do this if I was you. Is I would make like a Tarzan character just hanging around in here. It does look gloomy, but maybe he's like an evil Tarzan character. And he's just sitting there. I would make something like that. Just like that, like he's just chilling. Like one leg. There's like a tree under him. He's like trying to balance. There's like wind. Okay, maybe not wind, but you get my drift. Definitely not wind. That would be really cool if you completed that. That along with the extra little tree patterns and this being more detailed, this painting would be just done. It would be done, baby. Yes, Asashi. Any final questions before we close up shop today? So if you're new here, if this was the first time you've watched my lessons, you can find me and everything that I do on my website, istebrak.com. If you want to follow me and if you want to submit stuff for critique, just go to Google+. Everything is available for you there. All the images that I picked today were from the Google community. So if you want your stuff to be seen, just join here. Facebook is where you can get your paint overs back if I did paint over your work and you want your copy sent back to you. Twitter is where I announce like everything. Everything is available on Twitter. YouTube, you can like and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. And Instagram is where I just post some random ass sketches, but it's not important. And that's it. Officially the current theme is environments. I'll upload the resource pack as soon as possible by tonight or tomorrow, and it'll be available for you. The theme is the Titans graveyard, so it'll be an alien landscape with alien skies and alien clouds and alien rocks and alien remnants of great titans, and probably a character walking through it. So the premise of the story will be someone or something has just come upon this massive graveyard of great titans that they have to, like a stretch of land they have to cross over, and it is just a massive graveyard of the great body parts of, great stone titans that once fought in a great battle in the past. So it's really cool, really fantasy driven, my favorite kind of stuff. And it'll be a real challenge for you guys in your understanding of depth. I will do a lesson on depth and on landscapes and how to develop an environment and how to go around a feeling, how to choose colors. It cannot be grayscale, and there has to be, when you submit it, you have to submit it with some work. So I have to see that you've put in work. I have to see thumbnails. If there aren't thumbnails in your submission and it's just some sort of environment you've tried a year ago that you've recycled, I will be able to tell. So I want to see some thumbnails. I want to see some work put into how you developed your final image. It'll all be portfolio ready stuff once you're done, and all the corrections that I apply 3 weeks from now on the critique day will be that I recommend that you duplicate them so that you can post it in your portfolio and dress your portfolio up with some real character. But you can't start your environment painting unless I've posted the resource pack, or else what are you going to draw? Right? You can start by ideas, basic ideas. You can go ahead and start with that, but the details will come with requirements. The debrief, the resource pack, will come with requirements that you're going to have to use. Alright guys, have a great day. Thank you all for watching. Bye bye.